nonprofits are a critical part of that effort. Sorry. So as our community's foundation, as the city's community foundation, we are honored to play the role of convener and catalyst for change. We've seen what happens when everyone comes together. Our community, where individuals, organizations, government, business, when we come together to solve problems, we can do wonders. So let's make the most of this very unique opportunity. I am so grateful to our city leaders joining us here today to share information and put us on a path to strengthening community together. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your partnership. I'm going to now hand it over to Elena to walk us through the next stage of sharing with us some community input and for introducing our city partners. So thank you, Elena. All yours.
Thank you, Geeta. So on behalf of CNC, I'd also like to welcome everyone to this info session on American Rescue Plan Act funds in Cambridge. For those of you who don't know CNC, our mission is to advance equity and justice in Cambridge through strengthening the nonprofit sector, building collective voice, and promoting collaboration. Our coalition is currently at 74 members and continues to grow, engaging organizations that provide a wide range of programs and services, from early education to the arts to affordable housing production, environmental preservation, and much more. We see the deployment of ARPA funds, as Geeta said, as an incredible opportunity to put our local nonprofit sector on the road to recovery from the pandemic. We've also articulated some specific hopes for these funds in guiding principles that we've shared previously. These have included leveraging nonprofit leaders as knowledgeable partners by including them in strategy development in addition to engaging them for service delivery, centering racial equity from the outset to end the disparities in access to and delivery of services exposed by the pandemic, investing in robust community outreach to ensure equitable distribution of funding while moving with a sense of urgency, providing premium pay for essential workers at Cambridge nonprofits, offering additional support to those who have borne and will continue to bear the greatest health risks, as well as a strategy for nonprofits to help recruit and retain employees in this difficult market. Streamlining and simplifying any grant processes to the extent possible with federal reporting requirements. And finally, exempting projects and programs supported through ARPA from restrictions imposed by the Anti-Aid Amendment. We learned this week that that will be happening. And so I want to say thank you and that we're incredibly grateful for that. Now, we're very glad to have our city leaders and staff here today to provide more detailed information on administering ARPA funds in Cambridge and any decision-making and progress on process to date. Today, we have with us David Kale, the Assistant City Manager for Finance, Ellen Semenoff, the Assistant City Manager for the Department of Human Services, Michelle Kincaid, the Assistant Finance Director, Matt Nelson, Assistant to the City Manager, and Betty Lyons, a Federal Grants Consultant. So without further ado, we'll get to the meat of our conversation here, and I'm going to turn it over to the city team to take us through the details. And after the presentation, we'll open things up for question and answers. We have built in pretty significant time for that, so please hold on to your questions until the end of the presentation. Thank you.
So Matt, do you want me to kick it off or do you want to say something? Okay. So Matt's going to drive the PowerPoint presentation. I will tell you that I, for the first time, logged in a few minutes early to this Zoom page, and there was only 4 or 5 people. And I said, gee, this isn't going to be so bad. And then Elena let everybody in, and all of a sudden my screen popped up with 4 pages of people. So if you saw my eyes light up a little bit, that was just impressive about how many people logged on. So we thank you. We won't take very long to go through a brief presentation, so we'll leave time for questions. Matt's going to drive. So again, just a couple of things to highlight. We have a web page that has ARPA information on it, and that's right there's the address, www.cambridgema.gov, ARPA. And then we do have an email address, which is contained on the webpage, which is arpa@cambridgema.gov. So, and then we will, in addition to that, we're.
David, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna flip my screen here so it can be
Just take your
smoother.
time, Matthew.
Oh, thank you. I'll be slow.
There's nothing like the pressure of 70 people waiting, right, Matt? But it is-
I can't criticize Matt for 1 minute because he volunteered to drive the PowerPoint. So this is like, so Alan Semenoff, would you like to say a few words? Or
I'm happy to say a couple of words. I just want to say it's really exciting to be here. And I think that it's wonderful that the Cambridge Not-for-Profit Coalition, together with the foundation, are hosting this event. I see we've got to get to the main. Let me just say, clearly your voices are incredibly important to the city, and it's wonderful to be here today. So I'll stop so we can get going.
Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we do have a webpage that has a lot of good information on it, and there is an email address that you can access. While I think the web that our web page has a lot of great information, I just came from a development meeting where we're going to jazz it up a little bit. But basically, the web page really has a lot of good information and a request form that I will share with you in a few minutes. Okay, next slide. So again, I think that you're all pretty much versed on ARPA. So the city was fortunate to get a direct allocation of $65 million. In addition to that, the state did another allocation by county, and our allocation with as a city within Middlesex County is $23 million. So there's about $88.1 million in funding available directly for appropriation by the city of Cambridge. And again, I think below just shows you the magnitude of the ARPA funding. Matt, next slide. Again, ARPA basically is supports four, in technical term, buckets of investments, and to respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts, to support essential workers by providing pay or grants to essential workers, to support the provision of public services impacted by revenue declines. And again, I think for other communities, if you don't live in Cambridge, this is an important feature for municipalities who were impacted significantly by reduced revenues. There is an allocation methodology to provide funds for municipalities to replace funds that were not able to be achieved during the pandemic. And the fourth category is support necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband. So that just gives you a framework of how and where the money can be spent. Next slide. We're very pleased to be here today because we've been meeting with various groups as well as the finance committee of the city council. When these funds were approved by the city council, the city manager made a commitment to make sure that we had dialogue with the city council and received their feedback as we collected ideas and as we started to implement the expenditure of funds. As you can see, we've been meeting with other organizations such as yourself over the since the beginning of the year to provide this information and to solicit feedback as well as ideas. So again, we're pleased to be here today and expand our outreach of explaining the program. Next. And the good news here is that We have some time to spend these funds, and and again, the thing to keep in mind is that number one, the clock didn't start ticking until March 3rd, 2021. Anything prior to that is not eligible for funding. And we have to commit funds by December 31st, 2024. Even though that seems like a long way off, time has a way of slipping by. So it'll be here before you know it. But then once we commit the funds, there is an additional 2-year period to basically fully expend the funds, i.e. if we spent money on a capital project that took a couple of years to complete, that gives you the time to do it. The thing that I think you're all familiar with, I'm sure in some fashion, is that as a grantee, Cambridge must abide by all federal grant requirements and detailed reporting procedures. I will tell you this, that we just completed our first reporting period through January 31st, 2021. It was a learning experience. It was had some hiccups in it. So we've gotten over that hump, but we're going to be required to report expenditures on a quarterly basis. And so we're fortunate to have Michelle Kincaid, who's the Assistant Finance Director, as the point, and Betty Lyons, who just recently retired as a federal grants manager, to help us through this process, because it is somewhat complicated and somewhat, and we'll show you in a few slides, we don't want to be in a position to basically make mis-expenditures and then have to refund the money. I would say that we've also been fortunate enough to engage the services of KPMG Consulting to basically help us guide us through the compliance requirements and the reporting requirements. And I think that will help us as we continue to get requests and to expend funds to make sure that we're not in trouble in terms of what the feds expect for reporting and compliance requirements. I would say this, and I think you may hear me say it several times, these funds must have a COVID hook in them. So this is not, this is to provide COVID relief. And that is the thing that we've gone through with KPMG and internally, and looking at requests that we've received to date. We need to make sure that there is a COVID hook in these expenditures, because if there isn't, at some point, whether it's being audited by the feds or having to comply with a internal audit through our independent auditors on an annual basis, that is the thing that we will have to demonstrate in everything that we spend, is that we have a COVID hook for relief. Next slide. Again, initially, there was a little misunderstanding about what funds could be used for. And so right on the screen is places where you cannot spend funds on. But the thing that I will just spend a second on is on the third X. I think there was a misunderstanding that these funds cannot increases the city's savings account of free cash. It cannot be used to fund pension accounts or outstanding debt. It really, the only component of this that really has funding is, as I said, the revenue loss replacement component of ARPA. So again, this just tells you the things that we can't spend money, but I think the last item was confused by some folks initially, but I think we've gotten the word out that this is not a mechanism to basically add to the city's reserve accounts. Next. Again, I think that, as I mentioned a moment ago, we must abide by all federal grant requirements and detailed reporting procedures. And while there is broad discretion, documentation is necessary. And while we've just received the final rules and regulations from the US Treasury, I'm sure there will be modifications as we go along. And again, as I said, the goal of which is not to be in a position where we didn't do our due diligence for compliance and we get audited and we have to return funds that were expended. Next. Again, I think you may be more familiar with this than us, and to a certain degree. Reporting requirements through the period are significant. City will need to ensure grantees can help provide information as needed. And again, those of you who receive any federal grants or are subrecipients know the kinds of information that you're required to provide. Next. One of the things that we did back before the end of the calendar year is we put online on our webpage a request page or a submittal form for folks and organizations to submit their ideas to us. And we're collecting those and reviewing them. So again, I think you may want to speak a moment about whether or not this organization or the folks who make up the coalition maybe want to do a coordinated application or request or individual. I think clearly we have resources here to help you, and I know that Ellen clearly has been involved in prior processes, so I think is a good resource. So again, that just is a vehicle for you to communicate with us, and if you have questions, you can certainly email us or call us, and we'll be happy to help you through that and how you streamline that in order to make sure it's an efficient component. Next. Again, on the web page is significant resources in terms of materials and information. So you're more than welcome to go to that. Next. Keep on going, Matt. I just want to back to the COVID hook conversation. One of the things that we're required to do, one of the things that the feds will be looking for is there are expenditure categories, and within each expenditure category, there are specific items that you need to basically pin your request on. And so I won't go through all of these, but clearly in the area of public health, there's vaccination hooks and testing and contract tracing and prevention and medical expenses and the like, mental health, substance abuse, and other public health services. So again, within the broad category of public health, there are individual items that basically we have to tie our expenditure funds to and document such in our reporting to the feds. Next. Negative economic impacts. And again, that just gives you a indication of the things that we need to review as we receive requests for proposals. Next. Services to impacted communities. Again, this shows you several categories that fit within this expenditure category that meets the categories of why you would be able to spend ARPA funds on these specific instances. Next. Premium pay, again, that has its level of complexities, but generally there are reporting requirements for that, rules and regulations. And infrastructure, again, clean water, broadband, and the like. Next. Revenue replacement, which we just talked about, and administrative costs to help run the program. Because I think one of the things that clearly we're aware of is that as we roll out programs to help various communities, there is a cost of trying to get those funds distributed quickly and efficiently. So to the extent that we can use administrative expenses to expedite that we might take advantage of. I guess in terms of updates, we have spent some resources from our ARPA allocation to support our unhoused shelters and homeless food and supplies, vaccine clinics. We just had a distribution of masks and testing kits. We've just rolled out a small business support program with the other components to come. General homeless stabilization services. We have a pilot broadband program with the Cambridge Housing Authority as they roll out infrastructure to support broadband in their units and housing. And as I said, administrative and compliance reporting support. So the city has spent funds to date, but there's still are funds available, significant funds available to be allocated. As I noted, there is a, Matthew, if you can go to one of the first slides, there is a city council meeting scheduled for March 3rd, 2nd, I believe. And March 10th rather. And we will provide updates to the city council and receive their feedback from requests that we've received from the public, as well as from our city departments. So again, we've been spending this time to do what we're doing today, which is explain the program, but also having our departments submit requests for expenditures, as well as solicit ideas from the public. So, so we're more than happy to listen to what you have to say and answer any questions if we can't. I will tell you that the thing that has served us well is that folks who have asked us questions, we're not going to give you an immediate answer. We're going to say submit it either in writing or give us some more detail, because we don't want to give the wrong answer. And again, as I just showed you in the appendix, there are several categories where expenditures can be made, but we have a very creative community, and I wouldn't want to give you the wrong answer. So you won't hear any yeses or nos today. You'll hear, give us more information and we'll get back to you. So, and again, I encourage you to go to the webpage and take a look at the project idea submittal form, which also asks for amounts that you're seeking also. So with that, I think I did the presentation within the time allotted, and I guess I'll be happy to go to the next steps of the presentation. Okay.
Elena, I'm going to stop sharing, but if anyone needs to go back to a slide, I'm happy to pull it back up.
There was one question in the chat asking about whether or not the slides are going to be shared. Are these the same slides that are already on the website?
Well, those slides on the webpage were from the December 1st meeting. So I guess and again, a lot of the slides are the same, so we can post that to the web after this meeting. Okay.
Thank you. So at this point, we're going to just open this up for questions. So if people can use the raise hand button in Zoom, I will call on people as I see them. So does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? This is your moment.
Okay, thank you for having us.
I'll ask a question. Mitra Shavarini, Project Citizenship. In one of the slides, David, you mentioned that there was employee compensation. I assume it's related to COVID, but can you speak a little bit more to that? Or
I'm going to try to feebly explain that. I think there is a, and I will have Betty and maybe Michelle help me here. I think clearly there are some parameters where folks can be compensated, but there is a calculation, a percentage about how much that can add to benefit pay for employees during, and again, remember, this program starts after March of 21. So clearly that window is a little bit shorter than in the past. And I believe, Betty and Michelle, can you maybe explain how a calculation may or may not work, or we can get back to you with some specifics. We've looked at it, and frankly, I think, at least on the city side, we've been able to work with our employee unions and to work with our employee groups, and we've made some adjustments during COVID to help give premium pay in some cases for employees who were working during the pandemic. But Michelle, do you want to give a brief idea about what this may or may not cover from Betty? Or she's looking on the screen. Thank God for Zoom, because then you can go to your shared files and find the detail.
Hi, we're actually researching the with our consultants the backup on this, but there are parameters that are out there that are in the final rules, and basically premium, pay can be paid out. It's just based on a percentage of what people make, and they can only make a certain rate to get the premium pay. So once we determine those factors and the, exactly what the rates are, we will share that on online.
Great. Geeta?
David, you talked in the course of your presentation, you mentioned that, when people come together and apply, that might be a good strategy. Because instead of applying as individuals, are you looking for people to come together in the sector to put together joint applications for things they have? Like, it could be organizations that are looking at housing impacts and they come together to put together a fund, or that they can all distribute funding. Can you talk a little bit about what might be the preferred strategies from the city's side of how people may apply for this funding?
And again, I'll tell you what I think, but Ellen, who went through some of this process before, can maybe provide some insight. Obviously, there's 74 members of the coalition, and there's other folks out there. And so I guess everybody could submit their own application, and I guess that might be all over the place. So I would say that it based upon having a coalition, you might come up with a more strategized proposal and a more structured proposal that basically allows the city to digest that and to figure out how it could be administered. And so I think that is why I said what I said. By no means does that mean folks can't submit individual, but I think for efficiency and effectiveness, and to really, for some clarity, it might be good to hear, not one, but a couple ideas. But I think 74 ideas might become a little cumbersome. Ellen, feel free to tell me where I misspoke.
Well, let me just say that I look to my colleague, Michelle Kincaid, who would in the end need to be the one who said, yeah, you have that wrong. So I'm happy to put something out here, but I just want to be clear that I don't know every intricacy of ARPA. So something I say today might in the end not be correct, but let me give you a couple of examples. And I know that Elena and others work together as and Geeta and I were deeply involved in the using community benefits funds to provide support to not-for-profits. And there was a process there, and there were rules that we needed to follow, perhaps less serious, less onerous in some ways than the ARPA reporting might be, but I could imagine that a proposal about how nonprofits in general who have been impacted by COVID there might be a proposal for what could funding look like, and that similar to, but not necessarily identical to, the small business loans that I think some of you are, well, small business grants. So that's one kind of process, and I would look to my city colleagues to know better what that might look like, but we certainly had some experience with what that could look like, working with recommendations from the coalition on behalf of all nonprofits. A second area might be if there's a kind of service that you could imagine, there's a way in which nonprofits could jointly be participating. And I'll give you an example, but I don't actually know that this works. But I just want to say that I understand there is a deep need for more mental health services across, and we hear that constantly. And I wish I could tell you that we're only hearing it now. Been hearing it for 20 years. It's just that it's so much worse now. And I don't know whether there's a way in which nonprofits could think about, is there some kind of shared service that you could imagine that could work? Because there aren't enough people that you could each hire for your individual organizations. But I think about, and I'll stop in a minute, but just there's an example that we have that affects the early childhood programs where the city has a contract with Riverside Community Care, and all of the early childhood programs, primarily actually community-based programs, but all of the programs in the city have access to that contract. And what happens is the staff that are paid through what's called the Early Years Project are able to support programs, support the staff of those programs, and in some instances, support the individual children. So that's funding that covers across the board, because all of those programs couldn't possibly find or afford their own mental health support. So something like that, I could imagine that if you could think about what could that look like and could imagine something that could be funded, that might be something we could do. And then the complications of who manages that and the reporting that that organization, but I would assume that there'd be administrative funding within a grant to support that. That's just an example of something that I could imagine, and you may have many different ideas about collaborative efforts that might support different sectors. And I can, I know there's food related stuff that we're already funding, and that there might be other ways that you could think of that.
And I would just add, Michelle and Betty can add in, or Matt, is clearly, as I said earlier, every proposal that we get needs to go through a review for compliance and that COVID hook, and the ability to find a way to do reporting efficiently. Because again, we do have to report our expenditures to the feds. So to the extent that that could be streamlined, probably serves everybody well. But Michelle, Betty, and Matt, do you have any comments?
I can just say that we did just, as you mentioned in our slides, we just finished our first reporting period. And one of the programs that I actually manage is the restaurant homeless shelter relief meals program. And we've been funding that with ARPA funds. And it was a little laborious, I'll just say that, in terms of the actual reporting. And just to point out that a specific example of how at every level this is still evolving. So while we were in the middle of reporting, the feds changed a few of their parameters. And so, we had to be flexible in how we reported. So it's just, it's going to continue to change. I think that was even on one of our slides. As we continue to plan this out, things will change. So we just have to continue to be flexible.
Michelle,
There was
Betty,
sorry, go ahead.
Michelle, Betty, do you have anything to add, or?
I think Matt handled it, summed it up, but it just basically want to let everyone know it's money that is available, but there are strings attached. There are, reporting requirements that we would have to get the information and set it up so that we could get it from you, so that we can report it properly to the federal government. But it's not a problem. It's just, something that definitely has to happen.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
There was a question in the chat about the time frame for submitting an application and receiving funding.
I would say that we're constantly reviewing what we've received. I think that on the March 10th meeting, we'll be sharing that with the council. As I said, some things that were pretty straightforward for testing or test kits, or for Matt's program, or supporting the unhoused at our wellness center. Those are things that were fairly straightforward to fund and to report on. So I guess this is an evolving process. So the answer is there's no at the moment, no deadline if you don't have your idea and by a date. I think we're trying to be as flexible as possible. And I think, as I said, we've got some time. So I think we're trying to be thoughtful about this to make sure that the money is spent in a prudent way and a thoughtful way. So no, there's obviously when we get closer to having more of the 80 million plus obligated, I think we may have to be in a position where we have to put some deadlines or guidelines in about that. But for the moment, I think we're in the sort of a dual role of trying to expend funds where areas that we know are ever of need, but also trying to solicit ideas to see if we will come up with a funding plan. So right now, no. That was a long answer for a short answer. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. Laura?
Sure. Thanks, Alina. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for organizing this. This is really helpful. I think I am the executive director of the Charles River Conservancy, and some of our projects and work is in partnership or at least in coordination with city departments. And I imagine that other nonprofits are in the same boat. Can you talk about how we should or might think about coordinating with those city departments, I guess, in terms of like how the funds are going to flow in the application process? Is there a way to like talk about that? I know it's a pretty short application, but just can you talk about more of that coordination with specific city departments and how that might work for nonprofit partners?
I'll start, and maybe Ellen can maybe fill in. You know, I think Ellen maybe described a moment ago that clearly our departments have submitted some ideas that may require partnerships with various nonprofits potentially, or it may be an idea where basically we would solicit help from nonprofits or other organizations to help implement the idea or the program. I think that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out, which is here's the need, here's the idea, here's the program. What's the best way to implement it? Because I think we can't do it all. As I said, I think, but at the same token, there might be organizations with expertise to help us do that. And I think that's part of the conversation. And so, but I know that our departments have been thoughtful about things that have a COVID hook that meet the guidelines. And I guess that in my mind, that's a little bit more of the implementation and how you do that effectively and efficiently and use the current infrastructure the city has to get that done. Ellen, I don't know if you have anything to add with that.
I don't think I know the answer to that in a way that would be really helpful in this moment, but I think we want to keep being able to think to make this work as much as possible for folks.
Okay.
There are a few more questions in the chat, but I see Carmen has had her hand up, has been really waiting very patiently. So go ahead, Carmen.
That's okay. Carmen Chen from Just a Start. I saw that there, you know, one of the bucket is around digital broadband infrastructure. We're actually thinking of what services you're thinking of, more like a digital navigator, you know, support people to use the digital assets. Would that be past your COVID hook to allow people to really take advantage and utilize the digital assets just because they have broadband? We work with a lot of residents who are not able to take advantage of that.
Okay.
I would say that I would need to know more specifics about how that would actually work. I know that in some of our current planning is basically as you know, the city has embarked on a very extensive broadband exploration project, and we're utilizing our consultants to sort of build upon the work of a prior study, but also we're working with the CHA to fund a pilot program to provide broadband services to some of their residents as they build out their infrastructure. So I guess to answer your question, I guess I would need a little more detail about, and that's why we've put the request form online about what that looks like and what that would mean and what the cost would be, and like a book report, who, what, when, where, why, what significance. So that would be helpful.
David, could I ask a question or add something to that? I think about the combination of the COVID hook necessary here and sort of in response to what Carmen was saying, I don't know if this is the COVID hook, but to the extent that so many services which might have been done in person have needed to be done virtually, and that individuals who cannot easily access those services virtually have been deeply impacted. And so is there a way to describe some of what Carmen's talking about in a manner that fits the code? I see Michelle Kincaid nodding a little bit. I would say that might be the vehicle by which you were tying these together.
Right. Yeah, that's from what I'm listening to, that would be a great service, because there are, appears to be a lot of people out there that are businesses or people in their homes that may have access to broadband, but don't even know how to get it or use it, or so the training aspect is going to be huge in this area. So I would say that would be what I would write on my app, on your idea form, basically, that you're offering a service to help those that were underserved and to bring broadband into their home or business or whatnot.
There are a few more questions in the chat, and I'm going to combine two into one. Can you speak to the range, the funding range per project that you're looking at, if there is one, as well as what share of the $88 million has already been committed to projects?
So I'll answer the second one first. We sort of have a couple lists. We have a committed list, which basically are the things that I talked about earlier that support the initiatives that I think that the manager, the council, and the public were looking for us to support in terms of testing kits and PPE and homeless support for the meals program or the wellness center, and a few other types of things. So I think we're at about a little under 20 million bucks, and there's 88 million on the table. But then frankly, as we're collecting ideas, there's probably another $38 million in ideas maybe. And then there's public ideas, which adds, and again, those all have to be vetted. So I guess in one hand, the good news is that we have ideas to vet, which is good. I think we had some clear needs that we're meeting. So one of the advantages this means to hear from folks and to get ideas, but clearly we're not at the point where we've spent the whole allocation of 88 million, but we spent about a little under 20 on things that were of immediate need and of high priority, and of things that, as I said, testing and vaccination clinics and PPE and homeless support and things of that nature. So I think small business grants and the like. So I think we've sort of moved prudently, but we haven't moved so fast that we've obligated all the funds, because we wanted to get feedback and hear from folks. And so that's where we're at. And then what was the first question?
It was if there's a range in terms of the grant size.
I'd say at this point, I don't know. The answer is no, because frankly, if it's a great idea and it hits the COVID hook and it's something that really would support the priorities of the community, priorities of the city council, and something that can be implemented. If it's a small dollar amount, doesn't mean it shouldn't be funded. And again, we've we funded some relatively small items that had high impact. So the BioBot program with Public Works uses to basically measure, I'm trying to say it delicately, but waste, and basically was able to be indicators of the pandemic. And clearly, if you look at some of the models, the BioBot technology basically predicted the quick dissipation of the latest surge ahead of time, and basically was a leading indicator. So it's those kind of things that aren't a ton of money, and we've spent some money on the warming center to make some improvements. That wasn't a lot of money. So I don't think, you know, obviously we're not looking for $100 ideas, but clearly, you know, I wouldn't say if it's a good idea, but it's a few $1,000s that would disqualify it from being considered. And again, a lot of this is back to the COVID hook and the ability to implement it effectively and efficiently. So, okay.
Great. Can you speak to who's making these decisions? You've sort of, referred to a vetting process, but who's actually participating in that committee?
I think we internally are collecting the ideas, the finance department. But as I said, we'll have 3 meetings with the city council and the manager to sort of give an update of where we are and solicit feedback. I think we're trying to be collaborative in that manner. And I think I'm fairly certain we'll be able to get some good information and move forward on some of the ideas that are pending, because if not all, virtually all of these ideas are city council priority areas. So I would think that, again, the manager, when these funds were initially appropriated, made a commitment to the council to make sure he kept them in the loop and basically provided them information. So we've had a couple meetings, and as I said, we have one in March to sort of continue that process.
Are there any funds available that could fit into affordable housing restoration, renovation of distressed homes?
I don't want to break my rule of saying yes or no. I guess I would. I get again. I'm not trying to be coy here, and none of us are. But I guess you get an idea, okay, and then you say, does it fit into one of those major categories, and then does it fit within the subcategory, and how does it work, and what's the dollar amount, etc. So I don't want to say yes or no unless Michelle or Betty want to say yes or no out of absolute knowledge that it would or would not be available. I know, Michelle.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, David, can I just jump in really quick and say, in addition to the submission form, ARPA at cambridgema.gov is a great tool. We are, any question that is asked relating to this, we're going to answer. And if we have to go back to KPMG for how it's connected to federal reporting, that's what they're there for. So please use that email address. The finance team will review it and we'll get answers back. So that I can put that in the chat, but it's also on the website.
And that's a good point, Matt. And there's probably a document that's at this point over 150 pages of Q&As that were submitted that have been answered. So it might be that. And again, it's all over the country. People are asking questions, and the Treasury tried to do a comprehensive Q&A booklet. And so, so that's another resource that's on the web. Any other questions?
Dan?
Hi, I just parked the car so I can ask a question. How are you doing? Dan Marshall from the Cambridge Community Center for the Arts. And I'm just a second, 1 second. And there's a car trying to get through. And my question is there
ARPA funds cannot fix fender benders. Go ahead, yes.
Oh, that is, okay, that's such a great retort there. Awesome. Well, too bad. Well, good thing they didn't hit me. So the question I have right now is about, since you've been very helpful at answering questions in this meeting, is there a way to communicate with you as we form these ideas so that we can vet them out before we write those detailed proposal that Pooja was mentioning we should do. And so that we don't go in the wrong direction per se, and spend unnecessary time if we can first vet it out through you.
I guess I'll say it two ways. Clearly, there is an email address that's on our webpage for ARPA, and you can utilize that. Or if you want to use Elena to basically be the funnel, that's okay too, since I just volunteered her. But I think that whatever is the most efficient, I'll let you all decide, but there is a webpage and there is a coordinator. So I'll let you decide what's the best way to go. And again, I think give us a little time to absorb the question and get back to you so that we give you the right information. So.
Thank you. And one of the concerns I have is that until one receives enough details about projects, especially nuanced projects, a written question may not really clarify what what the project is, and then at that point you're already writing part of the proposal. So is there a way to, through these channels that you recommended, have a phone conversation or Zoom, so there's a back and forth and things can be clarified in time saved?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would ask for the request to the web page email address, and then, we'll be happy to figure something out.
There was another question in the chat about if an organization can apply for more than one project or can submit more than one idea.
I don't think there's any restriction. I think that we're trying to collect ideas. So Michelle, Betty, Matt, I don't see if an organization has a couple of different ideas that meet the COVID hook that we would say no.
Right. No, I think you should submit them all.
Okay, by the way, could somebody put that down? Michelle said submit them all, because then we get 500 in our basket next week. She won't be smiling as much as she is right now. Go ahead, yes.
I think we got through all of the questions in the chat. I'm just looking at the time, it's 4:25. So maybe one or two more questions before we close out. So are there any other questions? Geeta.
There were a couple that I think will be important for people. One is that can these funds be used for needed infrastructure improvements as a result of the public health kind of improvements, or is it only for program services?
Maybe I could help for a second in framing this question to Michelle Kincaid and Betty. So for example, let's just say that you have a food pantry. I'm making this up, guys. You have a food pantry, and in order to be able to deliver better services, you would need to do some work. It's not just the cost of the food, it's not just the staffing of the people. You need to do some work to renovate. I'm not talking about $1 million renovation. I'm talking about some work you need to do on the space to make it more accessible for the residents. If the underlying project of doing the food pantry is eligible, would some infrastructure support to make it more effective? And you may not know the answer, but am I right that that's what you're asking about?
Yeah. It's capital improvements or an arts organization to allow to make sure, this issue came up previously about air handling and, the airflow kind of issues where you needed to put in either humidifiers or you need to put in air purifiers.
Yeah.
Are those kinds of equipment, changes allowable?
Yes.
Okay, great.
They fall under like a PPE and.
Okay. But they're capital improvements. That's the difference. I think it came up a lot with the arts organizations in the past. And
Okay.
the other question is that does a certain level of grant size trigger off a federal audit of some sort, or are the reporting requirements that you're asking nonprofits to fill adequate?
I mean,
Like say a nonprofit applies for funding and gets, say, $1 million or $2 million for it could be a collaborative that's doing it. Would it trigger off some sort of a federal audit or something? Or is it enough that the group is reporting to the city?
I would say that, I guess there's two ways to look at that. We were just talking about this the other day when we were doing our first reporting about the millions and millions of pieces of paper or electronic pieces of paper that are being submitted to the US Treasury. I would assume at some point there will be some kind of federal audits, spot audits. I think if I had to guess, what will happen is that we annually get audited by independent auditors. I would assume that there'll be a requirement that they pull so many of the things that we funded and make sure that we've met the guidelines for compliance and reporting. I think that you as a recipient probably will be under the same kind of scrutiny, but not necessarily directly from the Fed, but probably through your independent audit. Michelle is the auditor in the crowd here, but do you have any insights, Michelle? You're on mute.
Michelle, you're still on mute.
Yeah, so if you get any funds over 50,000, you have to report it through FAFATA reporting, and that's a federal reporting. And then if you, were to spend funds over 500,000, then you're now in a pool of, requirements for A133 audits, which is a federal audit.
Okay.
But yeah, so there's different thresholds will trigger those. We could, I think there's information on the website. If there isn't, I'll put it up there.
Okay, any final question?
Okay.
I think we're good.
All right, thank you for your participation and interest. And again, these were great questions, and we look forward to working together in the future. We'll see what it yields. Okay.
That's good.
Thank you, everybody. Really
Thank you very
appreciate you guys
much.
coordinating